Did you know that, across the arc of their extraordinary journeys, some of the most influential Black R&B icons carried a story the spotlight never revealed? They were the architects of melodies that taught generations how to feel, how to forgive, how to fall in love, voices that seemed fearless under the stage lights. Yet beyond the applause and shimmering stages, there were chapters of their lives written in quiet ink. Behind the brilliance of fame, they navigated a private landscape shaped by expectation, identity, and the silent weight of being misunderstood. These 15 artists gave the world timeless anthems of devotion and vulnerability, but in their personal worlds, parts of their authentic selves remained carefully guarded. In an era when acceptance was far from guaranteed, they chose resilience over revelation, artistry over explanation. Some left this world with questions still lingering in the air, stories whispered but never fully told. Their legacy, however, is not defined by secrecy, but by courage, the strength to create beauty even when the world was not always ready to embrace every shade of who they truly were. These revelations are more than unexpected twists. They illuminate the quiet negotiations that many music icons have had to make in order to preserve their artistry and public image. Behind the chart-topping hits and standing ovations often stood difficult choices, private compromises, and the constant balancing act between authenticity and expectation. Their journeys are not simply footnotes in music history, they mirror the broader cost of visibility in a world that has not always embraced difference with open arms. Fame can amplify a voice, yet it can also place boundaries around the person behind it. In today's video, we step beyond the stage lights to thoughtfully examine these lesser-known chapters, stories of resilience, identity, and the complex human experience behind legendary success. If you're curious to discover more about the lives and legacies of these remarkable artists, make sure to subscribe and like the video so you won't miss what's next. And we truly value your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being here and for exploring these meaningful conversations with us. Born Paul Williams in 1934 inches, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Billy Paul emerged as one of the most distinctive voices of the Philadelphia soul movement. His sound carried an unmistakable sophistication, an elegant fusion of jazz phrasing and gospel-rooted emotion that set him apart from his contemporaries. Over a career spanning more than 5 decades, he cultivated a style that felt both intimate and worldly, capable of navigating romance, social commentary, and introspection with equal finesse. His defining breakthrough came with Me and Mrs. Jones, anchored by the timeless title track, Me and Mrs. Jones. The song soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, earned him a Grammy Award for Best R&B Male Vocal Performance, and sold over 2 million copies worldwide. With its lush orchestration and restrained confessional tone, it became a landmark in soul music, an anthem of forbidden love delivered with nuance rather than spectacle. Yet Billy Paul was more than a single hit. He was a craftsman of mood and message, an artist whose velvety tenor carried stories that lingered long after the final note. Through decades of changing musical landscapes, his voice remained a steady presence, refined, reflective, and unmistakably his own. The success of Me and Mrs. Jones did more than elevate Billy Paul to international fame. It showcased his rare ability to merge jazz sophistication with the emotional intensity of R&B. The title track, Me and Mrs. Jones, unfolded like a quiet confession, telling the story of forbidden affection through restrained phrasing and a silky, seductive arrangement. Its understated delivery made it one of the most enduring ballads in modern music history, proving that vulnerability is as powerful as spectacle. Yet, as often happens with artists who cultivate mystique, curiosity about his personal life lingered alongside his success. Over the years, speculation surfaced regarding various aspects of his relationships, including rumors of same-sex connections. Billy Paul never publicly confirmed such claims, and no verified evidence substantiated them. Much of the conversation remained conjecture rather than documented fact. What remains undeniable is the emotional depth he brought to his music. Whether exploring romance, longing, or social themes, his artistry spoke with nuance and sincerity. The unanswered questions surrounding his private life ultimately did not define him. Instead, it is the elegance of his voice and the timeless resonance of his recordings that continue to shape his enduring legacy. Billy Paul was known for maintaining a deliberate distance from the spotlight when it came to his personal life. He granted interviews selectively and rarely ventured into intimate details, preferring to let his recordings speak on his behalf. That reserve naturally invited curiosity. In the absence of clear answers, speculation emerged, including rumors about aspects of his romantic life that he never publicly addressed. Yet, silence does not equal confession, nor does it confirm conjecture. Billy Paul chose discretion, a decision many artists of his generation made in an era when privacy was both protection and principle. What listeners often interpreted as duality in his music, the tension between tenderness and restraint, may reflect the complexity of the human experience rather than any specific hidden narrative. His love songs endure because they feel universal. They speak of longing, secrecy, devotion, and vulnerability, emotions that transcend biography. Whether drawn from personal truth or artistic imagination, their power lies in their ability to resonate with countless stories beyond his own. In the end, it is the music, not the rumors, that defines his legacy. Throughout the 1970s, Billy Paul continued to expand his artistic range with projects like 360 Degrees of Billy Paul and War of the Gods. These records moved beyond romantic balladry, weaving in political reflection, social commentary, and subtle sensuality. He was never content to remain stylistically confined. Instead, he blended funk rhythms, gospel undertones, and smooth R&B textures into a sound that felt thoughtful and exploratory. Yet while his music stretched boundaries, his public persona remained composed and measured. In contrast to contemporaries like Marvin Gaye, who openly challenged record label pressures and found his personal life intensely scrutinized, Billy Paul maintained a guarded presence. He rarely invited the media into his private world and avoided dramatic public confrontations. That deliberate mystery became part of his identity. Rather than engaging in spectacle, he allowed nuance and subtlety to define him. His restraint did not diminish his artistry. It reinforced it. By keeping his life out of the glare of constant exposure, he preserved a sense of dignity and focus, ensuring that the conversation returned again and again to the music itself. The legacy of Billy Paul carries a quiet complexity shaped as much by discretion as by melody. For many listeners, he remains eternally linked to Me and Mrs. Jones, the velvety confession that defined an era. For others, he represents something more enigmatic, an artist whose catalog suggested layered meanings that were never fully spelled out. His restraint invited interpretation, and over time, that interpretive space became part of his mystique. Unlike performers who embraced public exposure, Billy Paul maintained firm boundaries. The life he chose not to narrate publicly became intertwined with how audiences perceived him. Yet the unanswered questions never eclipsed his artistry. Instead, they added texture to it. His voice, measured, reflective, and emotionally precise, remains the most reliable testimony of who he was. In 2016, at the age of 81, he passed away after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. His departure closed a chapter in Philadelphia soul history, but not the resonance of his music. Decades later, conversations about Billy Paul still move between admiration for his craft and curiosity about the privacy he preserved. Ultimately, it is that balanced artistic openness paired with personal reserve that defines the enduring intrigue of his legacy. The passing of Billy Paul stirred more than nostalgia for a golden era of soul. It also reopened the quiet space he had long protected. Admirers mourned the loss of a refined, unmistakable voice, but alongside that grief lingered curiosity about the chapters he never placed on public display. Will he remain legendary for both his artistry and his reserve? Perhaps that very balance defines him. Songs like Me and Mrs. Jones endure because they feel intimate yet restrained, confessional yet dignified. His delivery suggested depth without overexposure, emotion without spectacle. The mystery was not absence, it was atmosphere. In many ways, his silence became part of his signature. He sang about devotion, longing, and quiet desire with extraordinary nuance, while maintaining personal boundaries that he felt were necessary. rather than diminish his impact, that discretion added texture to his legacy. Billy Paul's story lingers like one of his ballads, smooth, reflective, and slightly enigmatic, reminding us that sometimes what is left unsaid can echo just as powerfully as what is sung. Sylvester James Jr., known simply as Sylvester, stands as one of the most groundbreaking figures of the disco and R&B era. Born in 1,947 inches, Los Angeles, California, he was raised in a gospel-rooted household where church music shaped his early vocal foundation. Even as a child, his voice carried a soaring, almost celestial quality, one that would later electrify dance floors across the world. Yet his early years were not without hardship. His expressive style and refusal to hide his femininity often placed him at odds with rigid social expectations. Rather than suppress who he was, Sylvester chose authenticity. As a teenager, he left home and gravitated toward San Francisco's vibrant countercultural scene, where he found belonging within the LGBTQ community and among creative performers who celebrated individuality rather than conformity. In that environment, Sylvester's artistry flourished. He fused gospel intensity with disco exuberance, crafting a sound that was both spiritually rooted and unapologetically liberating. More than a singer, he became a symbol of fearless self-expression, proving that identity and artistry could coexist boldly on the same stage. The 1970s became the defining chapter in the ascent of Sylvester. By the end of the decade, he was no longer an underground sensation, but a full-fledged disco icon. His electrifying anthem, "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," exploded onto dance floors worldwide in 1978, climbing the Billboard charts and selling millions of copies. The track's pulsating rhythm and euphoric energy captured the spirit of liberation that defined the era's nightlife culture. Sylvester's soaring falsetto, both powerful and ethereal, cut through the industry's conventional mold. At a time when mainstream music often favored narrowly defined images of masculinity, he appeared unapologetically glamorous, theatrical, and authentically himself. Sequins, bold fashion, and fearless stage presence were not mere aesthetics. They were declarations of identity. More than a chart-topping performer, Sylvester became a cultural symbol. Through disco's exuberant pulse, he challenged rigid norms around gender and love, embodying a broader movement toward visibility and self-expression. His success proved that authenticity could resonate far beyond subculture. It could command the world's stage. Although Sylvester embodied fearless self-expression in fashion, performance, and sound, he was notably guarded when it came to labeling his personal life in interviews. When asked directly about his relationships, he often redirected attention to his artistry, suggesting that the music itself was the truest statement he wished to make. His flamboyance and visibility spoke volumes, yet he rarely reduced his identity to a headline or public declaration. It's important to recognize that Sylvester was widely understood within both the music world and LGBTQ communities as an openly gay man, even if he resisted formal announcements framed for mainstream media. In the 1970s and early 1980s, visibility came with real risks. Social backlash, industry resistance, and threats to personal safety were genuine concerns. Choosing how and when to define oneself publicly was not simple. It was strategic and sometimes protective. This tension made his career uniquely layered. He was celebrated as a symbol of liberation and authenticity, yet he navigated a cultural landscape that was not always ready to embrace that freedom without consequence. Rather than a contradiction, his approach reflects the complexity of visibility in a transitional era where art could shout liberation even when personal narratives required careful framing. Sylvester became a luminous figure within LGBTQ spaces, especially in the vibrant nightclub culture that embraced his fearless artistry. To many, he was not just a performer but a beacon of authenticity, yet mainstream recognition often lagged behind his cultural impact. In an industry and society still grappling with visibility and difference, the barriers he faced were real, shaping how widely his brilliance was acknowledged beyond dance floors and devoted communities. The 1980s brought profound hardship when Sylvester was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, during a period when the illness was surrounded by fear, misinformation, and devastating stigma. As the epidemic disproportionately affected the LGBTQ community, silence and prejudice often compounded the crisis. Despite declining health, he continued to record and perform, his falsetto still radiant even as his body grew frailer. Sylvester also used his platform to support awareness and compassion, contributing financially and publicly to AIDS-related causes in ways that reflected the era's evolving understanding. His advocacy may not resemble modern campaigns, but in a time of widespread denial and discrimination, even visibility itself was powerful. Through resilience and generosity, he transformed personal struggle into collective care, proving that his legacy was not only built on music, but on courage and community. In 1988, at just 41 years old, Sylvester passed away, leaving behind a legacy far larger than the years he was given. Though his life was brief, his impact was seismic. Dance floors still pulse to his voice, and generations continue to rediscover the fearless joy embedded in his recordings. He is remembered not only as a disco icon, but as a pioneer who challenged rigid ideas about gender, expression, and desire. At a time when conformity was often rewarded and difference penalized, Sylvester stood radiant and unapologetic. His presence alone was a statement proof that glamour and authenticity could coexist without compromise. There is a poignant paradox in his story. He embodied liberation on stage, yet navigated a world that was not always prepared to fully embrace that freedom. His music carries both euphoria and defiance, celebration and quiet resilience. It reminds us that many artists have had to carve space for themselves where none existed before. Sylvester endures because he transformed vulnerability into vitality. His falsetto still soars as a testament to courage, creativity, and the enduring power of living truthfully, even when the world lags behind. Jermaine Stewart, often mistakenly spelled Jermaine, was one of the most vibrant and expressive figures in the 1980s R&B and pop landscape. Born in 1,957 inches, Columbus, Ohio, he grew up in a household where music and dance were constants, nurturing a natural flair for performance from an early age. His charisma and fluid movement eventually led him to Los Angeles, where he gained early exposure as a dancer on Soul Train, a cultural institution that launched many careers. From there, Stewart transitioned into music more directly, working as a background vocalist for groups such as Shalimar and The Temptations. These experiences sharpened his stage presence and vocal style, blending polished choreography with a distinctive, airy tenor. His breakthrough came in 1986 with the infectious hit We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. The track, playful yet refreshingly restrained in its message, climbed international charts and cemented his place in pop history. With flamboyant fashion, animated performances, and undeniable charm, Jermaine Stewart carved out a space that felt bold, colorful, and unmistakably his own, in an era defined by excess and experimentation. We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off propelled Jermaine Stewart into the global spotlight, climbing to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and finding enthusiastic audiences not only in the United States but across Europe. Its infectious rhythm and playful message stood out in a decade often defined by excess, offering something both catchy and refreshingly distinctive. With vibrant fashion, animated choreography, and a magnetic presence, Stewart became a familiar face on MTV. His performances radiated color and confidence, capturing the spirit of 1980s pop culture and winning fans worldwide. He seemed to embody celebration itself, an artist who moved effortlessly between dance floor energy and polished pop appeal. Yet behind the glittering image and upbeat persona, there were dimensions of his life that remained private. Like many public figures of his time, he navigated personal realities within a cultural climate that was not always welcoming to openness. That contrast between the exuberance seen on screen and the discretion maintained off it adds depth to his story. His legacy endures not only in chart positions, but in the vibrant individuality he brought to an era that still echoes through pop history. Throughout the height of his fame, Jermaine Stewart maintained careful boundaries around his personal life. Within industry circles, there were whispers about possible same-sex relationships, yet he never publicly confirmed or defined his orientation. In the cultural climate of the 1980s, marked by the AIDS crisis and widespread homophobia, such disclosures could carry serious professional and personal consequences, particularly for a black male artist navigating mainstream pop visibility. For many performers of that era, discretion was not simply preference but protection. Stewart chose to center his public narrative on music, style, and performance, crafting an image that felt expressive yet guarded. He balanced flamboyance with polish vibrant enough to captivate audiences, measured enough to avoid triggering backlash in a conservative media environment. Rather than engage speculation, he allowed his artistry to remain the focus. His decision reflects the difficult calculations artists often faced when authenticity intersected with safety and livelihood. In hindsight, that silence speaks to the broader pressures of the time, a reminder that visibility, especially during periods of stigma and fear, was rarely a simple choice. Although Jermaine Stewart continued to release albums such as Frantic Romantic and Say It Again, none matched the global impact of We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. As the music landscape shifted in the early 1990s, mainstream attention gradually moved elsewhere, even though he retained a devoted fan base that appreciated his distinct style and unapologetic flair. Behind the scenes, however, Stewart faced serious health challenges during a time when HIV, AIDS, was still surrounded by stigma and limited public understanding. The cultural climate often compounded the isolation experienced by those affected. Despite personal difficulties, he remained connected to music and to those who continued to celebrate his artistry. In 1997, at the age of 39, Jermaine Stewart passed away due to complications related to AIDS. His death marked the loss of a vibrant creative spirit, whose presence had colored the 1980s with energy and individuality. Though his commercial peak was brief, his impact endures as a reminder of both the exuberance he brought to pop culture and the human fragility that existed beyond the spotlight. The passing of Jermaine Stewart marked more than the loss of a vibrant pop voice it symbolized, the quiet weight many artists carried in an era shaped by stigma and fear. His bright fashion, animated performances, and infectious melodies often masked a life navigated with caution. For some, that silence now feels as defining as the music itself. Like Luther Vandross and Billy Preston, Stewart belonged to a generation of performers who created timeless songs while guarding personal boundaries in a climate that was not always safe for openness. Their legacies are celebrated for artistic excellence, yet also colored by the social pressures that shaped their choices. Jermaine's story ultimately extends beyond speculation. It highlights a broader truth. Behind fame often stand private battles rarely visible to audiences. The melodies endure joyful, rhythmic, unforgettable, but they are accompanied by the reminder that artists are human, navigating vulnerability beneath glittering lights. His life encourages empathy and reflection, urging us to build a world where authenticity no longer demands silence, and where talent can flourish without fear. The legacy of Jermaine Stewart extends far beyond the sparkle of 1980s pop. Yes, he gifted the world vibrant, danceable anthems that still echo with color and charisma, but his story also reflects the quieter realities of navigating fame within restrictive cultural climates. In an era when difference could invite backlash, discretion often became a shield. Jermaine never publicly detailed every aspect of his personal life, choosing instead to let his artistry define him. That decision, whether protective or principled, mirrors the broader experience of many performers who balanced visibility with vulnerability. Their music radiated confidence, yet behind the spotlight were careful negotiations about safety, acceptance, and survival. His journey reminds us that talent does not exist in isolation from society. Artists create within the boundaries and pressures of their time. By honoring Jermaine Stewart's life, we also acknowledge the importance of building a world where authenticity is met with understanding rather than stigma, where no one must dim their truth simply to endure. His songs remain joyful and alive, carrying both the exuberance he shared and the quiet resilience that sustained him. The journeys of these legendary black R&B artists reach far beyond chart positions and platinum records. Their stories intertwine brilliance with restraint, celebration with quiet endurance. They gifted the world timeless love songs, melodies that still accompany weddings, late-night reflections, and moments of healing, yet many navigated cultural climates where authenticity required caution. Behind velvet vocals and polished performances were human beings negotiating identity, expectation, and survival. Their legacies remind us that music often carries more than harmony. It carries history. It holds the tension between public applause and private vulnerability. It reflects not only romance and rhythm, but also resilience in the face of stigma and misunderstanding. When we listen closely, we hear not just entertainment, but echoes of perseverance. What are your thoughts on the lives and legacies of these artists? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your voice keeps these conversations alive. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next deep dive into the untold chapters behind the music we love.